My name is Donagh Berry and I'm from Teagasc in Ireland. I'm the leader of Work Package 5 on genome-based management indexes. And what I'm going to talk about here for the next 30 minutes is the precision ranking tools on the expected lifetime dairy female performance and resilience. And the accompanying talk will be something similar, but it will be on beef performance and resilience. So if we just look at performance then, and it could be any particular trait, milk yield, fertility, it could even be human height. Many of us, or many of the cows, are somewhere in the middle. There's going to be some extreme producers or animals with extreme fertility or extreme height, and there will be some animals on the opposite side of the distribution. And these would be generally few. And in between them, we have more and more animals. And actually, if you look at the profile, this is generally what a profile looks like for what we call a quantitative trait, a trait that is continuous. It follows what we call a normal distribution. Lots of individuals in the middle, in and around the average, and just a few individuals in the extremes. And they get fewer and fewer as you get more extreme. So this is what we would see from, as I said, from a dairy cow's perspective. And a lot of the time we would look at the animals at the top of that distribution, and we would tend to breed from these animals. So we would assume that these are genetically the best. And then we look at the animals on the bottom of the distribution, and these are the animals that we would tend to cull. Now, this is just one trait I've shown you, like for example, milk production, but of course one would do this for all the traits that influence profitability in a dairy herd. And that's when it really becomes unwieldy, because from a breeding perspective, yes, one would look at the selection indexes, whatever country, we call it the economic breeding index. In Ireland, that's our national breeding index. But you also would need something on the opposite side to identify animals that are the least profitable, are going to be the least profitable within your herd, and these are the animals that you would want to consider culling. So why do we do this from a breeding perspective? Well, if we just look at generation 0, that's just today, let's pretend, the generation of animals we have today. Again, they follow the normal distribution. So what one does is it selects the animal in red there from the right-hand side of the distribution, and they mate those with each other. And that produces animals in generation 1, and you keep doing this with each generation. And what you can see here by this blue line, which represents the average of generation 0, is that the distribution is shifting every single time to the right. So your population as a whole, be it a population, or be it as a herd, or be it as a flock from a sheep perspective, is improving generation on generation. So again, we just look at this from another practical perspective. Again, we have this normal distribution, lots of animals towards the average, and fewer animals as you become more extreme. In this situation, we're just going to cull the animals on the left-hand side. So what you're doing really by culling the animals on the left-hand side is you're also shifting that distribution to the right. You can do that, again, generation on generation by continuously selecting animals on the lower hand of the distribution. So what we want to present here is how do we identify this precision ranking tool that identifies these animals on the lower production potential or performance or resilience potential, and for identifying for culling, and in doing so, then shifting the distribution, the mean of the distribution of our population in the positive, favorable direction. And that has led us to what we call the cow index, which is the cow's own worth. That's what the COW stands for. And there's plenty of videos and other information that you can find out about the cow's own worth from an Irish perspective. And I'm particularly going to focus just on Ireland. However, what you can see is that the approach that we have developed is agnostic to species to a large extent, but it's also sufficiently generic to be applicable to other countries or populations or subpopulations. There's a lot of traits included in this index that I'm going to talk to you about. But again, you may not always have those particular traits for an individual jurisdiction, and you can just leave those. But you also may have some other traits that are of interest, which can also be included in the individual modules of this breeding code. If you want to dig into the science a little bit more, there's the scientific paper on top. And we go into a lot of the maths, but also into the validation of this index and how good it is at identifying animals that are least profitable. So let's just take a high-level view of what this cow index looks like. So what are the factors that influence whether a cow is going to be more profitable in a situation? So it's obviously these are genetic effects. We see on the bottom, we call these our estimated breeding values, so our EBVs. That's really just a fancy word for her genetic potential. Then we have a crossbreeding effects, because we know from data, particularly the likes of New Zealand, that crossbred animals, even for the same genetic merit, crossbred animals tend to be more resilient. So if you have 2 cows in your herd, genetically they're the same, so you have the same total merit index, but one is crossbred, then you would expect that crossbred animal on average to be more profitable. So it's less likely of a candidate for culling. So this must be reflected in an index on culling. It's not reflected in an index for breeding, and it never will be, because the crossbreeding effect is really a function of the meat of the individual. But here we're not talking about meating, we're talking about the animals themselves. So therefore, the crossbreeding effect is really important. The next one we call permanent environmental effects. It's a fancy word, but really it's just another word for environmental effects that remain permanent for an animal's life. A good analogy that I always use would be in the human world. If you broke your leg as a kid, and you had a bit of a limp, that's going to have a permanent, like, it's not genetics, well, unless there's genetics for being a bit of a messer, but let's just say it was an accident. It's not a genetic effect, so it's an environmental effect, and that limp is kind of going to stay with you for the rest of your life. So it's a permanent environmental effect, and it will influence potentially the ability of you to play rugby or play soccer. However, if you have kids, those kids aren't born with a limp. They go right back to the start. So that's why it's an environmental effect that's permanent with you. And an example just I'm showing you here is that, you know, if a cow is lying down in cubicles and another cow just happened to stand on that cow's teat, you would end up with 3/4, which is an environmental effect, permanent for that cow, because she only has 3/4 for the rest of her life. But of course, her heifer calves will be born with 4 active quarters. In Ireland, we operate a seasonal calving system where the cows will calve a very concentrated period in the springtime. And the later calving cows, because in Ireland, we like to dry off our cows towards the end of the year, all in one particular date. So if the cow is calving in May, for example, it will have a shorter lactation and therefore be less profitable than the cow who's calving in February. So that obviously is going to influence the profitability of future profitability of an animal. And then finally is the age of the cow. Unfortunately, even from a human perspective, we all know that we're going to die eventually, and the older that you are, the more likely you are to die. And it's the same thing with cows. The older the animal, the more likely it's going to die, or more likely you're just going to have to cut it. So it's got less life left in the individual. So therefore, that will also influence its risk of being culled. If we dig into these a little bit more, so the cow index, we actually broke it up into 3 modules. So you think about it, well, what influences the remaining lifetime profitability of this animal? Right? It could be any age. So it's, well, she's just calved, so it's the current lactation, and that's really production, management, maintenance here is her live weight and her fertility. Was she a February calving cow or a May calving cow? That's going to influence her profitability for the next calendar year. Then we have her future lactations. So it's kind of the same factors that influence her profitability in the current lactation, but it's got that added dimension on the very bottom there about, well, how many more future lactations is she likely to have? She's an old cow, she's not going to have too many more lactations. But if she's a young cow, and especially a young cow calving in like February, then there's a good chance she's going to have a lot more lactations. And then finally, the final module is the net replacement cost. So what I mean here is that, well, if you sell the animal as a culled cow, you're going to get some money back from her, right? So you're going to be a bit of value, but then you have to replace her with a replacement heifer. So those 3 modules make up the entire cow index. So let's just dig into them a little bit further, starting off with the current index and starting off with those components. So everybody would have a genetic evaluation for milk yield, fat, protein, etc. Some would have a genetic evaluation for somatic cell count or other traits like lameness, and some, Ireland included, would also have a genetic evaluation for maintenance, so live weight. That's all influenced by these factors up at the top again: genetics, crossbreeding, permanent environmental effects. So what we do is we have these what we call production values, where we sum up all these genetic effects and crossbreeding effects to get us an estimate of the total merit, not just genetic, the total merit of an individual. And we use the current milk price. So if the cow is going to produce a lot of milk this year and the milk price is good, she's going to give you a lot of profit this year. Right? You'll see in the next few slides, when we talk about the future lactations, we don't use the current milk price. We use the projected milk price because you don't realize the current milk price in a few years' time. For fertility, and this would kind of be specific to seasonal calving herds, particularly what you would see in Ireland, it's the current lactation. So we just base it on our actual calving date. And if you dig into the paper a little bit, you will see that we know what the extra profit from a February calving cow is relative to a March, relative to an April calving cow. So we can just quite quickly plug that into the value of an animal based on when did it calf. That's a pretty easy one. The future lactation one, that's where there's a little bit of maths, what we call transition matrices involved in it as well. So again, we start off, it's pretty much the same as the current lactation. We get the milk genetic evaluations. We have a crossbreeding effect, this heterosis effect, and we all know it's worth some bit of a value for fat and protein. We have a permanent environmental effect, and these all contribute to our total production value for milk production, health. We have a good bit of data on the beef characteristics of an animal's progeny, and also live weight, etc. The other one inside there, of course, is descendants, because we know every lactation, the cow is going to produce a calf. Now, there's 52% chance that it's going to be a male, 48% chance it's going to be a heifer. Probably around, only 90% of those heifer calves born will actually materialize to become a cow. But that cow is expressing half of the genes of her dam. So that all has to be encapsulated as well within the culling value of an animal. As I said in the previous slide, once we have the total value or total merit of an individual for all of these individual traits, we weight them based on their economic importance using the future milk price. And again, here's the future milk price. Nobody knows what it's going to be, so it's our best guess of what the future price is going to be. As I said, we talk about the descendants. So that's really, it's how many heifer calves are likely to be produced. But also, if the cow has the calf this year, that calf is not going to be producing for another 2 years. And 10 euros or 10 pounds or whatever currency you have today is worth less in a few years' time because of inflation. So we account for all of that when we're putting together the value of an animal. Now, the fertility one is a little bit complicated. The previous time we have the actual calving dates, but we're talking about future lactations. So what we need to do is we need to predict, well, okay, she calved in February this year, but when's she going to calve next year? Okay, and if you have insemination data, yes, you can improve that, get that prediction better. But what you're really trying to do is, in a lot of instances in Ireland, the cow has only really just calved when you're trying to put her back in calf. So you don't have any of that insemination data. And sometimes you might make that kind of decision before the start of the breeding season. So you might look at your cows and say, well, look, that cow, she's old. She's going to die soon. I'm eventually going to have to cut her. So therefore, I'm not going to inseminate her. I'm not going to serve her. And you make that kind of decision before the start of the breeding season. So the platform that we have developed enables you to make that decision actually anytime in the reproductive cycle. But sometimes it'll be made prior to the start of the breeding season, and other times, and probably more often, it'll be made after the pregnancy diagnosis, after the end of the breeding season. So we do these things called fancy terms called transition matrices. And really what they're trying to do is they're trying to work out the probability of a cow transitioning, the word transition matrix, transitioning from 1 month of calving in 1 year to the next month of calving in the next year. Okay. So I'm just going to give you a quick example of how it looks. So we have here a cow who has calved in February. She's just after calving, and it's in February. Now, I've ranked from best genetics to worst genetics. We broke them up into 10, and this is genetic merit for fertility, right? So this is a genetically high fertility cow calving in February. And we will try to work out what's our probability next year of calving in March or April or May. Also, what's our probability next year of calving same month, calving in February. And of course, there is a little bit of a probability that she will pull back her calving date. So if her calving interval is, say, less than 365, then she may actually calve in January. Then we have another cow, also calves in February, but she's the worst 10% genetically for fertility. So we do the same thing. We work out, well, what's the probability based on historical data that she will calve in next year in March, April, May, then February or January. And this is actually real life data from Ireland. So that particular cow, she's good genetically for fertility. There's a 53% chance next year that she will also calve in February. There's a 22% chance she will calve in March, 8% chance she will calve in April, and just a 3% chance she will calve in May. And based on our model, our economic model, we know that a March calving animal is 151 euros less profitable than a February calver. Or if you look at May there, for example, a cow calving in May in Ireland is 437 euros less profitable than a cow calving in February, because of driven predominantly by that shorter lactation length, but also the fact that she's producing a higher amount of milk towards the shoulder of the years where you're going in with concentrates, more expensive concentrates and silage. So if you work out her economic value, it's minus 63 euros. Now we go to the girl down on the bottom, and we kind of compare it to the high fertility cow. So this low fertility cow, rather than having 53% probability of calving in February, she now has only a 13% chance of calving in February. And if we look at the far right there under May, the high fertility cow, you can see she had a 3% chance of calving in May, or slipping until May, while the low fertility cow down the very bottom right, she has a 7% chance of calving in May. And it's the same, the profit is still the same as minus 437 euros for a May calving cow, but it's actually, you're multiplying it by 0.07 as multiplying it by 0.03. So if you do the maths on that, what you realize is that February calving cow with poor genetic merit for fertility is costing 99 euros 84 cents. So it's really the difference between that 99 euros and the 63 euros. So we work out then that low genetic merit cow is costing you 36 euros 71 cents more than this higher genetic merit cow calving in February. And that's how we work out what's the probability of calving in particular months. Now, you'll see later on that this tool is completely dynamic. So if you put in data, it automatically re-ranks the cows. So if you put in the fact that this cow, you didn't inseminate her until July, right? It's impossible for her to calve in February. So therefore, the model accounts for that, and it changes all those probability statistics. If you pregnancy diagnosed the animal, and a lot of the time when you pregnancy diagnose the animal, the technician will give you the expected calving date. You can just plug that in and it recalculates the culling value per animal, and then you rank the animals differently. And the software does all of that. So that's the future lactations. The next part then is the net replacement costs. And the value that you get for a particular animal is the salvage value, price per kilo, plus its genetic merit for carcass weight. So in Ireland, we would do genetic evaluations for carcass weight of cows as well as for progeny, but here's of cows. So if you have a big Montbéliard cow, she's going to make a lot of money in the factory, okay? And compared to this small little Jersey cow, right? So with the genetic merit for carcass weight or for size, we'll capture that. And then, of course, you have to account for the fact that, well, if you've lost one cow from the system, then you're going to have to bring in a replacement to replace her. And that is a cost on the system. So in Ireland, it's 1,500 euros to bring a 22-month in-calf heifer into the system. that's the science behind it. I know it's pretty mathematical and it's tough enough to follow. Now, if we just quickly move to the operational side of things. So how does this operate? And of course, this is just Ireland. Ireland, we have, we're lucky that we have a centralized database, one database where all the data is stored in there for cattle. It's run by the Irish Cattle Breeding Federation, the ICBF, and you can just Google them and you can get onto their website and have a look at it. And every farmer who participates in ICBF would have their own login details. So they log in and they can see all of the particular cows. And this is an example. If you were to link or click on the cow profile of your herd, this is what a farmer would see. So here it has its ranking of the individual cows from 1 to whatever. Here we're just showing you 8 cows, and that's its cow index. So what we can see is the cow index is the expected remaining profitability of a cow. The top cow, she's almost 2,000 euros more profitable, is more profitable is what you expect to get out of her. While then cow number 8 in the very bottom, she is, what's that, 300 euros less profit. Right, and you can go on that, and that'll be all well and good. But for the guys that are really interested, then you can work out it's here. And well, where's she getting that cow index from? Right, is it from the current lactation, or future lactations, or is it her cull value? So the 3 of those will sum up to the cow index. But again, it enables the farmer to go down and dig in a little bit deeper into what's the component of the index. So they're the 3 components. There also is some additional information for the farmer. So our national breeding index, the EBI, you can see right beside it. And then you can see its last calving date, was she pregnancy diagnosed, when's her expected calving date, and the farmer themselves then can say, look, I've made a decision, I'm going to cut her. Because like obviously the computer can go so far, but if this cow is just kicking the hell out of you inside in the milking parlor, there's no genetic evaluation for kicking the hell out of you in the milking parlor, but the farmer would make a decision, no, and just getting rid of her. So all that additional data is there for the farmer to just dig into to see how good his animal is. And of course, you can click on any of those individual cows, and you get again the minutiae of detail if you so desire to get stuck into it. You can look at it here. I'm just showing you the milk, but you can look at its fertility and live weight, etc. As I said earlier, the cool thing about this is it's real time. It's on the fly. So you might run your genetic or go onto your farmer might go onto their report, and it's these rank of animals, rank 1 to 5, 20% replacement rate. So cow A, B, C, and D, they're safe, but the recommendation from this computer program is to cull cow E. Right? But then what the farmer might do is they might say, okay, well, we're after getting some pregnancy diagnosis data, or that cow got lame, or that cow got mastitis, inputs the data, and automatically it'll re-rank the animals. So in this situation, cow E is now safe, but the cow A is actually the culling candidate. So chances are, after the pregnancy diagnosis, it was recognized that cow A was actually not in calf. So therefore, her profit goes to essentially 0 because she's not going to recalve, and therefore she becomes the likely candidate. So you can see here that data here is crucial. A lot of the data would be automatic. So like, for example, milk recording, the insemination data, if it's done by a technician, that automatically flows into the database, so the farmer doesn't have to input it. If they're do-it-yourself artificial insemination, then yes, lameness and mastitis would have to be inputted. Some pregnancy diagnosis data is also within the database. So the key here is to minimize the amount of data to be inputted, but importantly, to have it in real time. And of course, by doing this, the farmer gets a more accurate ranking of their animals for culling. And as a geneticist, what I am is we also get that data then to allow us to have more accurate national genetic evaluations. So to conclude, this cow index, cow's own word, this is an index that we have developed for culling. And it is very complementary to our breeding index. So the culling, remember that distribution, that normal distribution that I showed, which nice peak, and it came down the sides. So the culling was on one side of the distribution there, your poor performing animals, and the other, the EBI is on the right-hand distribution. So if you use any of them, you can shift your distribution in a favorable direction. But of course, by using the two of them concurrently, you can potentially shift it even further. The final point I would make is that they are, as the name suggests, decision support tools. They're not the be all and end all. So what I generally recommend to Irish farmers is, most of them would know their cows. Anyway, they know which cows they're going to cull. They'd have identified their 20 cows that they're going to cull this year. I would also recommend that they run the cow index on them, identify the 20 cows there, and then compare the two. And hopefully you should get 10 to 15 of those cows would be in common to both lists. Right? So you as a farmer said, I'm going to cull those 15 cows. The computer program said, yes, or you should cull those 15 cows. So you kind of agree on that. But then there's these 10 cows, the difference of 5 that you kind of disagree on. And you just dig into it a little bit. One of them might be the one about she kicks you mad in the milking parlor, and you will say, okay, well, the algorithm didn't know that, so I'm going to cull her. But there might be another few that the algorithm is picked out, and when you dig into her, you realize, well, she's got mastitis twice per lactation for the past 3 lactations. Geez, I forgot about that. So she could actually then be a likely candidate for culling, and you might change your mind. So as I said, the cow indexes for culling, it is sufficiently generic to be applied to any population, really. The parameters, the weighting or the economics differ depending on the jurisdiction. The availability of different traits differ depending on the jurisdiction. But the module and the theory behind it remains the same. Thank you very much.